Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wondered if what you expect to feel actually changes how you feel? Well, this new study might have a clue. Imagine you're about to watch a movie. If someone tells you it's amazing, you'll probably expect to love it. If they say it's terrible, you'll expect to be bored. But does that expectation truly shape your actual experience? That's the big question this research dives into. The idea is that people evaluate experiences based on what they expect. Usually, if you expect something good, you have a good experience. This is called assimilation. But sometimes, if the reality is super different from your expectation, it can make you feel the opposite. If you expect something great and it's terrible, you might feel even worse. This is called contrast. There is also something called need for cognition, which is basically how much people enjoy thinking deeply about things. This study tried to see if this need for cognition changes how our expectations affect our feelings. Think about Forrest Gump saying life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you are going to get. We all form expectations, but is blindly adjusting expectations the best way to deal with disappointment? The Affective Expectation Model, or AEM, suggests maybe not. It says our feelings are often driven by what we predict we'll feel. So how happy or sad we feel about something isn't just about the thing itself, but also about our feelings beforehand. Generally, positive expectations lead to positive feelings. But if there is a big gap between what you expected and what happened, and you notice that gap, you might feel the opposite of what you expected. This original study wanted to see if people who like to think a lot, the ones with a high need for cognition, are more likely to notice when their expectations don't match reality. If they notice this mismatch, they might have a contrast effect. So what exactly is this need for cognition? It is basically how much someone likes to engage in and enjoy thinking. These people tend to seek out information, reflect on things to make sense of the world. They go deeper into information. This means they might be better at spotting when expectations and reality don't line up. They might scrutinize their environment more closely. So if their expectations just don't match the experience, they might have this contrast effect. The researchers chose to replicate one specific study from 2003 by Geers and Lassiter. They felt it was important because understanding how expectations influence our evaluations is key in many areas like politics, management, and marketing. When you decide to buy a product or believe a policy, it is partly based on what you expect from it. Also, this study is highly cited, making it a good candidate for replication. So how did they try to test this? They basically tried to recreate an experiment from that 2003 study. They thought that people with a high need for cognition would be more likely to notice when an expectation and an experience don't match and feel the opposite of what they expected. This is the contrast effect. In the original experiment, people were asked to watch a video. Before watching, some were told the movie was award-winning and praised by others. Others were told it was boring and tedious. Some got no information at all. After watching the video, everyone rated how they felt about it, and their need for cognition was measured. The original study found that generally positive expectations led to positive ratings, but for people with a high need for cognition, positive expectations actually led to less positive ratings, which is that contrast effect they were looking for. The researchers in this new study conducted their experiment online. They told participants they were assessing movies. They then presented them with a short 5-minute movie. Similar to the original study, some people got positive expectations, like the movie was popular, others got negative expectations, like it was boring, and some got no information. After watching, participants rated the movie, they answered questions about how often they watch movies, and if they pay attention to awards, and importantly, they were asked what their expectation was before watching it. Finally, they completed a need for cognition scale and some demographic questions. A really cool thing about this study is that they followed open science practices. That means they pre-registered everything they planned for the study, their analysis, everything before they even started collecting data. They also made all their materials data and analysis code publicly available. This is super important for science because it lets other researchers check their work and try to reproduce it. They basically emptied their file drawer, meaning they reported all their findings, not just the significant ones. They tried to make the new materials as close to the original as possible, but had to make some changes mostly because it was an online study. They created new videos for the expectation induction where a student describes the movie positively or negatively. They also found an excerpt from an old silent comedy film called Don't Shove. They edited it to be about 6 minutes long and added German subtitles. Because the study was conducted in German, they felt this movie was ambiguous enough to be evaluated both positively and negatively. Table 1 highlights some differences. The original was in person and in English, while this replication was online and in German. The original only used university students, but this one had a mixed sample of students employed and unemployed people. They also used a slightly different need for cognition scale, but overall tried to stay really close to the original design. Now let's talk about sample size. The original study had 160 participants. To make sure they had enough power to find effects if they existed, this replication study aimed for 400 participants. Power is basically the chances of finding a real effect if there is one. Even though they didn't quite reach 400, they got 252 participants, which is still significantly more than the original, and gave them over 80% power to detect the original effect. Their analysis plan was pre-registered. They first applied exclusion criteria to ensure data quality. Then they looked at the demographics. They checked the internal consistency of their measures, like how reliable the affect index and the need for cognition scale were. They ran a test to see if their expectation manipulation worked. For the main part, they used a statistical test called ANOVA to see if there was an interaction between the expectation condition and need for cognition predicting how people felt. They also created a graph similar to the one in the original paper to visualize the interaction. So what did they find? Their sample had 252 participants. All their measures were found to be reliable. Interestingly, their manipulation check showed that people did remember their expectations differently based on whether they were told the movie was popular or boring. So the expectation induction seemed to work. Figure 1 shows that the positive expectation group remembered expecting more positive outcomes than the negative expectation group. This is good. It means they were successfully influenced by the initial information. Now, for the big question, did they find the same effects as the original study? The answer is no. The overall statistical model that looked at how expectation and need for cognition affected feelings was not significant. Specifically, there was no significant main effect of the expectation condition on how people felt. There was no main effect of need for cognition. And most importantly, there was no significant interaction effect between expectation and need for cognition. Table 2 lays out the regression results clearly. You can see that for every predictor, including the interaction terms, the p-values are all above 0.143, which means they are not statistically significant. This tells us that the expected relationship where high need for cognition leads to a contrast effect just wasn't found in this replication. They also ran another statistical test called an ANOVA. Again, absolutely no significant effect was found. No main effect of expectation condition, no effect of need for cognition, and crucially no interaction effect. They also looked at the individual slopes for each expectation condition, and none of them were significantly different from 0. Figure 2 shows the regression lines predicting affect scores from need for cognition and the expectation condition. You can see these lines are pretty flat, and the shaded areas indicating uncertainty are quite large. This visually confirms that there isn't a clear pattern linking expectation, need for cognition, and effect as predicted by the original study. Table 3 directly compares the original study's results with this replication. For the key interaction effect, the original study found a significant result with an eta squared of 0.04. This replication found an eta squared of less than 0.01, and it was not significant. The slopes for the different expectation conditions also showed no significant effects in the replication compared to the original. This table really highlights the lack of replication. They also did some exploratory analysis. They looked at the distribution of affect scores and found they were skewed towards negative ratings. This means people generally tended to rate the movie negatively. They also looked at the variability in those scores and the need for cognition scores. They found that the replication effect size was significantly smaller than the original effect size. Figure 3 shows the distribution of the affect index scores. You can see a clear pileup of scores on the lower end indicating more negative evaluations. Figure 4 shows the distribution of need for cognition scores. Table 4 is interesting. It uses a specific statistical model to directly compare the original effect size with the replication effect size. This moderating model shows a significant difference between the original study, and the replication. The replication effect was statistically significantly smaller than the original effect. This further strengthens the conclusion that the original finding was not replicated. So what does this all mean? The researchers couldn't find any evidence that affective expectations affect feelings, or that need for cognition changes this relationship. They say it is unclear if the whole affective expectation model is wrong, or if their study just wasn't good enough to find the effects, for example, if they lacked statistical power or if their manipulation wasn't strong enough. They admit that maybe their manipulation wasn't strong enough. Creating new materials from scratch and not pilot. Testing them might have been an issue. The movie itself might have been too negatively rated overall, which could have masked any effects. They also point out that switching from an in-person lab study to an online study might have an effect, though evidence for this is mixed. They also bring up the possibility that the original finding might have been a false positive. The field of psychology has seen several replication failures and issues with publication bias where only significant results get published. It's possible the original study found a statistically significant result purely by chance. They did have a couple of deviations from their pre-registration. They didn't hit their target sample size of 400 participants, but got 252 instead. They also made a few minor changes to their analysis code, mainly for aesthetic reasons or to fix errors, nothing that changed the core analysis. In conclusion, this replication suggests that the findings from Geers and Lassiter's 2003 study might not be as generalizable or robust as previously thought. The researchers believe more research is needed, especially in controlled lab settings using carefully pilot-tested materials. They suggest creating formal models to understand precisely when assimilation or contrast effects occur. They emphasize that replicating these kinds of effects requires a lot of effort and resources. Future studies should be very rigorous with strong manipulation checks and very large sample sizes. They hope their work and materials will help others explore the limits of the affective expectation model and encourage more replication attempts. So what is my take on this? This study is a great example of why replication is so important in science. The original study suggested that how much we enjoy thinking impacts whether our expectations lead us to feel better or worse about something. But this careful replication couldn't find that effect. It doesn't necessarily mean the original study was wrong, but it does suggest the effect might be smaller or depend on very specific conditions that weren't met here. One limitation is the online format compared to the original in-person lab study. Also, the movie might have been too negatively perceived by people overall. The researchers themselves mentioned that their manipulation might have been too weak or the movie not ideal. They raised the valid point that maybe the original effect was a bit of a fluke. The big takeaway is that understanding how our expectations play with our feelings isn't as straightforward as we might think. While this specific study failed to replicate a particular moderation by need for cognition, the general idea that expectations shape our experiences is still very much alive and important. Think about how brands try to set expectations for ourselves before a big event. Future research could focus on creating even stronger manipulations of expectations or testing this in different contexts. Maybe different types of stimuli like music or food would yield different results. And definitely more studies employing open science practices are crucial for building a reliable body of knowledge. What do you think? Have your expectations ever completely ruined an experience for you or made it even better? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this breakdown helpful, please hit that like button, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science simplified, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the fascinating world of psychology. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.